Namaste. Today, as we know, is the Mahashivratri day, and it is celebrated in India as the day of the marriage of Shiva and Parvati. It is also celebrated as the day when Shiva took poison, but the more common uh, aspect which is believed traditionally is the day when Shiva and Parvati are wedded. So it's very interesting that why are they wedded on a day which is just before the new moon? It's a day of utter darkness. That's how it is Shivratri, Mahashivratri. So we get a clue in one of Sri Aurobindo's poems about Shiva. Now it is named differently, but in the SABCL you will see the name as Shiva, the inconscient creator. Hey, now it is just Shiva. The inconscient creator part is gone. So basically, and the mother reveals this secret in a very interesting way. When a card was shown to her of Shivlingam, then she saw the card, Hutadi, and then she saw and said, this is the marriage of Shiva and Shakti of the divine and material nature. It is the divine soul and material nature. So the same power, the divine Shakti, she has gone and become absolutely unconscious, inconscient. That's the story in The Bride of Brahman. That she goes away and she completely enters into the material nature, inconscient. She becomes completely oblivious of her own origin. And then the reverse journey begins. She has taken the plunge for this very purpose. And then the reverse journey begins step by step. But here Sri Aurobindo describes the poem we are going to read, how she starts the journey back. So this is the beautiful part of that poem. But the background of the story, as we know, is that Shiva's marriage is initially to Sati. Sati is his own Shakti, which has gone into creation. And she is born to Daksh Prajapati. Daksh Prajapati is one of those form makers. And he is the one, he is a Prajapati. So, like the king, he has set rules and norms for this world, for creation. Now, on one side, there are rules and norms which people must adjust to, creation must adjust to. Through yagna, he has given a portion to everybody. But Shiva is beyond norm and form. This is the problem. The story symbol, though the story is revealed in a very picturesque way that he gets very angry because Shiva, Prajapati is Brahma's son and Shiva has cut off one of Brahmaji's head. That story itself is very interesting. We can go back to the story, but there will be too many stories, I suppose. But the story goes that, when Shiva loses the Shakti, then he's lost his own Shakti. So he becomes void of power. So Brahmaji wants to bring him back to his work. And he says, no, I am nobody. He himself becomes the plunge of the Purusha into the material nature. He too goes there as a diminished soul. Sri Aurobindo describes this in Savitri. Then Brahmaji tries many things, but Brahma and Vishnu, but he doesn't come back. So what he does is, just to awaken him, how do you awaken a person's strength? By challenging him by his most extreme. This is the strategy which the divine also uses. He'll take you to an extreme where your hidden force, which was submerged, suddenly awakens because of the extreme contrast. So Brahmaji with his 4 heads, he brings out the Vedas, but with the 5th head, he says something which contradicts it, opposes it. Which again a deeply symbolic story. Now you see why there is this mutual opposition and resistance through which the game, of evolution begins. Now that is what Shiva responds to when there is opposition. So he picks up the slayer of demons, he picks up his Trishul and takes away that head of Brahmaji. This is one part of the story. The other is, of course, another story legend in which Brahma is, one of the heads is gone. But this story is a very interesting story. So then he awakens to his own purpose and he is in his abode. But now he is gone to his abode alone. He had come here in pursuance of Shakti which has gone into material nature. So at first, Prajapati tells her, because Prajapati knows that she is the divine mother. And if she marries Shiva, it will disturb the balance of creation. So you see, in India, you have these 2 gods. Both are great powers. One is Shiva and the other is Krishna. Shiva takes you out of creation. So, always is Bhumi, Shamshan Bhumi, Bhasm, and all that, inaccessible summits. With Krishna, he takes through the evolutionary march of mankind. So, where will you find Krishna amongst opulence in Dwarka? He will be on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Right in the middle and thick of life, Krishna is there. Or he will be playing his flute, calling everybody. But Shiva will be on the summits of creation, or he will be from the place where you leave your body. So he's the giver of moksha. That's how it goes. Many legends of Shiva, but we'll just touch upon some of them. So now the problem is that Shakti has to come back. So right now she is born to Prajapati as one of his daughters, and he knows that she is the spouse of Shiva. So, but if she weds to Shiva, then creation will be dismantled, so to say. So he tries every which way to make sure she doesn't meet Shiva. But ultimately, she finds her way, or rather, Shiva finds his way. And then a whole series of events follow, circumstances, and eventually she is in deep love, passionate love with Shiva. And Shiva tries, tests, but eventually gives in, and the two get married. But this is an unhappy marriage. So, this marriage, as we know, ends up with a great tragedy. And the tragedy is that though Sati and Shiva are married, Shiva tells Sati that, one of the things is that she should listen to him. And then there comes a dilemma in Sati's life when Daksh Prajapati invites her to a yagna, but not Shiva. Because he wants to give the share of the yagna to all the gods, but not Shiva. So Shiva tells her, better don't go. Because it's not a good thing to go. Outwardly, you will see like a husband stopping his wife that, I am not invited. But the story is far deeper. But eventually she goes. And she goes, and Shiva is not called, and she feels very hurt, tormented. She tells him, why have you done it? And he calls names, and eventually Sati invokes the fire, and in that Yagna Vedi, she plunges and dies. And then Shiva comes, the Yagya is destroyed, the whole Prajapati is beheaded, and then his head is transplanted with the goat's head behind. And then Shiva carries the body of Sati and roams the quarters in utter grief. Just quickly the story. Now when he roams in the quarters in grief, so Lord Vishnu sees now this is another problem. Now, without Shiva, so Shiva is to be brought back. So he quietly follows behind and with the Sudarshan Chakra cuts the different parts of Sati till 51 parts fall all over India, and of course even in Baluchistan, modern Baluchistan. So India's spiritual map was decided long, long back. So something even possibly in Afghanistan. Even by the way, in Australia also they say one Jyotirling is there. But anyways, these 51 or 52 parts we can say of Sati fall all around. It constitutes the map of India if you look at it in a certain sense. And then Shiva realizes that now she is no more, the slain is gone, and he goes into trance and merges into deep, deep trance of bliss, ecstasy. Shiva is all alone. Now this is the first part of the story of Shiva's life, where Sati is Avidyamai Maya. She is also the divine mother, but in her ignorance form of ignorance. This story in Ramayana is shown in a different way. When Mata Sita gives herself to fire, and then the first sign of ignorance is when Lord Rama has told her, don't let me chase this Mayamrig because it may be an Asura who is concealing himself. But because she has started the Leela and given herself to fire, she says, no, you please go. And so she doesn't listen to Rama, the divine being, and he goes. And then Lakshmana says, no, nobody can kill Rama. And then she pushes him and he goes. And we know the rest is history. So there are two poises of the same divine mother. One divine mother. And this has implications in transformation also. One is her poise is the ignorant lower nature, where she is ignorant of her Lord, though she seeks him always. And even when she finds, she doesn't fully obey the Lord. And the other, where it's a form as knowledge, vidya, which is oneness. Vidya is about oneness, where she is one with the Lord through a tapasya. So this is the difference. In ignorance, she still seeks Shiva. The ignorant nature also seeks the divine. But with the heart's passions it clutches. But there is no purification which has taken place. There is no tapas. So even when she finds, it doesn't fructify in anything fruitful, it doesn't last. The union doesn't last. So this is the first part of the story, where ignorance in nature we seek. Now this story has implication in Sri Aurobindo's own yoga, because somebody asked him, but the Divine Mother is everything. She does all. So she is also in everything. So we accept everything that happens as coming from the mother. He says, yes, but you must learn to differentiate the mother in the lower nature and the mother in the higher nature. So you have to reject the mother in ignorance, and go forward to the mother in the higher supernature. She has embodied herself for this. So Sati dies. Now she doesn't die, but she enters into the flames of purification, where not only her inner soul, but even her bodily parts, it's right, the physical body's ego, that too must completely dissolve. And then out of the flames, who is born? She is reborn as Parvati. But now the story takes a different turn. And she is born to thee as the daughter of the mountains. Now see, this is a story very clearly of the union of material nature with a divine being. When it comes to Lord Narayana and Lakshmi, Vishnu and Lakshmi, Lakshmi's origin, though later on she goes into the ocean and comes from there, but still belonging to the subtle worlds. Brahma and Saraswati belong to these subtle worlds. Subtle world means world of the gods. But Mother Parvati, Shiva's consort, she is born to material nature in its peaks. So Himalaya, Himavan, Shailabala, we have already spoken about the entire tapasya of Mother Parvati, the whole Kundalini process. So we will not go into that detail. But essentially she engages in tapas, where Shiva himself comes as the Guru. She is seeking Shiva, but he becomes the Guru, and that's how he is known as Adi Yogi or Adi Guru. And slowly he starts the process of awakening her. And there are very interesting episodes in that tale. Very, very fascinating stories. That there is a place where she again meets with extreme challenge and her strength comes out. Always adversity brings out the best within us. Then there is another story we'll see often, Shiva dancing as Nataraj with that demon below his feet. Now this story also is a bearing with the yoga of transformation, because in that story the demon is called Apsmar. Apsmar literally means unconsciousness. Mother speaks of the 4 asuras and one of them is unconsciousness. So what he does, when he does the Maya, then we become unconscious. And it is through the door of unconsciousness, the mother says, falsehood enters. So very often people don't know how it has entered. And later on they are besieged. Death, falsehood, they all enter. But who is the first asura who goes and opens the door? It is unconsciousness. That's also the symbol of the Trojan horse. They are not conscious that what is hiding inside the, wooden horse. So the door opens through unconsciousness. We don't know. We say, that's why mother says best preparation for yoga is become conscious. What does she mean? Become conscious of your motives. We don't know that we give always a very nice, neat justification. But hidden behind it, there are unconscious motives through which falsehood and death enter. So she starts engaged in a tapasya. Now when Apsmar comes, this interesting story, Shiva manages to tame him with his, Damru and the Nada. But he cannot kill him. He cannot dissolve him. He cannot transform him. So the Asura says, I will submit below. Means by tapasya. There is a poem of Sri Aurobindo, Yogi on the Whirlpool. You can manage to keep the forces of unconsciousness and darkness below and rise over it. But they are not transformed. That's why yogis observe a lot of precautions in traditional yoga, because if they come into the world, it's very difficult. So they will observe many layers, like even in their dress and everything, so that they are safe. Because if you engage in the world, this Apsmar is active. He is not dead. He is like the virus who is in the system, half unconscious, but as Sri Aurobindo said, it's like a potential, dark and dangerous principle which is always there. So that has to be transformed if one has to lead a divine life upon earth. So we have the line of Shiva, and of course Shiva's famous story we know is drinking of the poison when there is Sagar Manthan. So Sagar Manthan is basically, there is a churning which goes on in the world constantly. So when you churn, first, before you deserve the Amrit, you have to be ready to swallow the poison. Otherwise you cannot deserve the Amrit. So in Tantra you have the first tantric state is when you worship Pashupati. Shiva is the lord of animals. Means you have to tame the animal in you. And then comes Gopala. The animals are tamed and they change into nice, cute cows which are light. So first when you tame the animal, then light is released from the caves. The same story in Rig Veda. Caves of the Panis from where they are released. And then they will be useful for going further. So there are many, many such hints and symbols. So Mother Parvati finally unites with Shiva. So she is material nature which climbs rung after rung till she finally unites with Shiva. So the mother has said that Shiva is the Lord of transformation. He not only destroys, he has to destroy the ego without which you cannot have transformation. With regard to mother, there are very interesting stories about Shiva and Sri Aurobindo. See, we all know about Sri Aurobindo and Krishna. But there is an aspect of Shiva which is very prominent in Sri Aurobindo. In one of his poems, The One Self, Sri Aurobindo writes, but Shiva and Krishna are a single God. In us too, Shiva wrestles with the world's grief. So wherever there is pain, suffering, Shiva comes and he drinks ultimately the poison. So after some time when human beings go through it, they eventually are freed of that. It's a stage. Karela, before the mithai. Then he says, in us too, Shiva struggles with the world's grief. In us too, Krishna seeks for sweetness and joy. When you have struggled with the world's grief, taken the challenge of life, then you are ready for Krishna's cup of nectar, of joy and sweetness. Otherwise, one is not ready. So sometimes people want to escape. You can't escape this law, the dread law of the way. First face Shiva. So how do you face? If you are a godlike being, Ashutosh. If you are a tapasvi, Ashutosh. If you approach him with submission, Ashutosh, the giver of boons. If you approach him like the terror-striking demons, because they are followers of might, why do all the demons go to Shiva? They don't worship anything except force. Krishna is too sweet for them, not realizing that he hides within him the dreadful force of Kali. They don't know it. In fact, it is said that a very interesting story where Kali and Shiva, they are moving around and Shiva says that I understand so much you have taught me. Tells Kali, this is a tantric scripture where you learn from the Shakti. But I don't understand what surrender is. So he says, okay, in next incarnation, I'll be born a man and you be a woman. Then you will understand what surrender is. You have to be a woman to understand. So Kali becomes Krishna. On the battlefield of Mahabharata, see? Shyama and Shyama. So Sri Aurobindo speaks of Krishna and Kali together in many of his aphorisms. So Kali becomes Krishna. And then also she's there in Draupadi. And then Shiva becomes Radha. That's how the Mahabhagavat Puran will tell you this story. So Shiva becomes Radha, docile, Ashutosh, teach me. But Krishna knows who he is or she is. So he bows down at her feet. So this is the story of Shiva and Krishna. Together they are one God. And in fact, Sri Aurobindo takes it that there are originally 4 aspects of the one. And each of these gods represents an aspect of the one, and each is an absolute in his own right. So what are the 4 aspects? We know the 3. Satchidanand. So you have Sat, which is sheer existence. You have Chit, which Sri Aurobindo speaks of Chit Tapas, which means consciousness and force. And we have Ananda, or delight. So Brahma is infinite existence. That's why he can create. He creates existences. Infinite, no population limits. And who fills them with life and ties them in one common thread? Vishnu is infinite consciousness. He has the knowledge that holds all of them together. That's why it's given to Vishnu not to create but to sustain the balance. Consciousness is the thread that runs through the warp and woof of creation. So his work is to maintain the balance of dharma. Lord Vishnu, that's why he embodies each creature as Narayana. So that is the second. And then force. But when creation reaches a point where, like Brahma, there is the opposition to the Vedas, the secret knowledge. The Vedas are the secret knowledge within creation. So adharma literally means going against that secret truth. It's not about ucharan karna in the wrong way. That's a very literal interpretation. But there is a secret knowledge, like the law of sacrifice. You cannot live only for yourself, selfishness. If lot of people start doing it like the arrogant asuras, then you are leading creation towards it's off balance. Because it's never meant to be like that. The law of sacrifices build the worlds. If you try to oppose it, either you will be smashed or creation will go into pralaya if the majority of mankind is like that. So, when creation goes into that mode, then Shiva dances the famous Tandava and there is utter destruction. But along with Shiva, Parvati dances and creates the new creation, Lasya. And then, when there is destruction, these are the three aspects, and then Sachidanand, Ananda. You see, Ananda is very interesting. This is the Ananda of creation. This is the Ananda of the journey of evolution. This is the Ananda of destruction. In all of them, it is delight, which is pervading the entire. You see, people who engage in war and all, there is a joy in that. Joy of sacrifice, joy of... So delight is all pervasive. It is at the beginning of creation. It's the delight which entered into creation. So we have these four aspects, which is Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva and Krishna. And each of them in their own right are absolute, in their highest self. So you will have Shiva and Mahashiva or Param Shiva, call him whatever. So like that, each one you can take as Vishnu and Mahavishnu. But this is the fundamental thing. Now, Sri Aurobindo reveals this aspect of Shiva as both benevolent and force in one of his poems called Epiphany. We won't be reading that today, but it's a wonderful poem where he is benevolent to a default. Anybody can come to him because he has nothing to do with creation and dualities. That's why Shiva doesn't go with you're a good guy, okay, you're a bad guy. Doesn't matter. He is beyond dualities. So he doesn't deal with dualities. Vishnu is also beyond dualities, but he has to deal with dualities. But Shiva, you go and worship him with a Belapatra and he says, come, that's enough. You have turned to the Lord, that's enough. So he is quick to please, but also quick to anger. He strikes terror if you approach him with a malevolent intent. If behind the surrender there is pride and ambition like Ravana, he tried to lift the famous, Shiv Tandav's throat, and all that Shiva had to do with his might was press his toe and he's crushed. So you have this wonderful aspect of Shiva. Now, but demons, they understand force. They don't understand delight. They are, you want to know whether a person is godlike or demon-like? Most of the people who are tuned to the gods, they have a happy heart and they are smiling, not the fake smile. There is the Krishna aspect. And those who are demonic in nature, they are either having a crude laughter, which is called a laughter of the asuras, very too loud and too frightening. Or else they are mostly extremely serious, grim, because they are all the time absorbing the poison of the world. It's their, unfortunately, the bad job they have taken. They are also doing a job. And that's why Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, and as Narada sang, the demons wept with joy. Because they are bearing the cup of grief. They are angry. You see, there's a whole political spectrum where when you see them on the screen, you don't have to know which side of the spectrum they form. They'll be so angry at everything. For no reason they'll be angry. So, have you noticed? It's that creed. So, there is a whole demonic whole thing. So, they worship force and Shiva represents force. That's why they all pray to Shiva. But the moment Shiva sees that they are coming with a malevolent intent, he can strike terror out of them. He is the Lord of force. So this is the story of Shiva and Parvati. Many, many other stories besides. And today we'll read one of his poems. So this is one, Epiphany. Please read it. It's a wonderful poem. I think we have done it in Hindi class once, so I'm not reading it again. One of my favorites, Epiphany. So two aspects of Shiva. One as the Ashutosh, benevolent, and the other as Rudra, who destroys. But incidentally, there is another word which is used for Shiva. Shiva meaning everybody knows, the benevolent, the all-pervasive. Of course, people give their own meanings, that's a part. Another name is Sambhu. It's a distortion of the word Swambhu. He is the self-born. So there are many stories of Shiva. So this poem is wonderful. There is another poem, Shiva, the inconscient creator, which now is only titled as Shiva. It's a sonnet, and it's another wonderful poem where Shiva sitting on the summits high. And see now what happens when the Divine Mother as Parvati, the last story, because we'll read about that, is the day of their marriage. She has to please Shiva. Why she has to be wedded to Shiva? Because there is a demon. See how boons carry their own advantages. Very strange boon. So he gets a boon from Shiva that only your son can kill me. So be it. Shiva is an eternal sannyasi. How can he ever marry? Impossible. But destiny has it. So Mother Parvati wants to marry him. And this story is also very illustrative. So, but Shiva won't come out of his trance. She tries everything. But no way. He is absorbed in his lonely ecstasy. Why should this ecstasy enter into the ecstasy of multiplicity? That's how this ecstasy of the one before it becomes ecstasy of the many. So demons are having a field day. So enters Kamadev, vital love. So all the gods call him, you are the only fellow. You can enslave us. Says, you guys are different, but Shiva, to bring him out of trance, he says, no, please try. So as the story goes, Kamdev and Rati, they conjure a beautiful space there, all the fragrances and everything. And then Kamadev fires a arrow of love, Cupid. And Cupid, not stupid, don't misread me. Often the difference is very little. But this arrow of love, as it pierces through Shiva's heart, Shiva does wake up. See, this is an interesting story. We should not forget. It's not that he is not able to. Shiva does wake up. But when he wakes up, his third eye opens and destroys Kama. What happens next is very interesting. Now Rati says, he is destroyed. Now if Kama is destroyed, this whole world, the vital love. You see there are two kinds of love. One is the love of Mahalakshmi, which binds creation. And it's a beautiful love. It is still in the emotional, but it can be uplifted to great heights. And the divine love, which Mahakali brings. So this love, vital is not all bad. It's an instrument of expression. So he says all creation is about that. Animals, plants, rare will be a human being who has, only in psychic love. So creation will be all disembodied. It's stopping. So Shiva says, okay, I make you Ananga. Meaning thereby now you will be in creation as an impersonal force. So Rati says, but I want him embodied also. So he says, okay, when he passes the buck to Lord Vishnu, when he comes in Krishna avatar, then you be born to a demon king, and he will be born as Aniruddha, as the grandson of Krishna, and then Kamadev is born as Aniruddha, and the two of you will get married. Now this story is again illustrative because Usha is, Sri Aurobindo has written a little play on that. Who is Usha? Dawn. She is born to a demon, Banasur. So in the demonic consciousness, this is the first glitter of light. And when there is first glitter of light, then love comes as a savior. So see, love and light come together. Usha is the first glimmer of light and love. So Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, love must not cease to live upon earth. However disfigured it is, still the Godhead by which all can change. So it's the marriage of love and light at one level, and that destroys the demon's kingdom. It has that potential eventually, abduction of Princess Usha, Sri Aurobindo has written about it. And Nirodha, I don't know what is his source, but he commented that Aniruddha was probably Sri Aurobindo himself, and Usha was Mrilalini Devi, who got, whom he was married to. This I don't know with authenticity, but it's there in Nirodha's talk. But coming back to the story, so Kamadev becomes Anang. Anang means now no more limbs, but it means you have become a wide impersonal force. Now, impersonal force is okay, but You want impersonal force acts in animals. They are very impersonal. They don't say, "Oh, I love you and I am married to you." That animals don't have. It's a force which goes around, moves plants, animals. They don't have anything personal, and even whatever happens, even at the vital level, is impersonal. They walk away. But in human beings, there is a need of a personal love. Now that's where the whole problem comes. So now, for that personal love to reach to its utmost level, which Shiva and Parvati represents, it's the story of the marriage, and many people start celebrating marriages, whatever, celebrating for one day after the Mahashivratri. Now you see, what is it about? The ideal couple, Shiva and Parvati, are supposed to be. But for that ideal couple, if you read the tantric text, you see the symbol. First, Kama must be destroyed. You can't have an ideal personal love between a man and a woman, the masculine and the feminine, you want to put it like that, who are represented as Purusha and Prakriti and as the man and a woman. This attraction between man and a woman is the Purusha and Prakriti. Mother herself has said this. And Sri Aurobindo has spoken of it, that it comes from Ishvara and Shakti and it can be transformed. But there should be absolutely complete freedom from Kama in the form of sexual desire. When Sri Aurobindo was asked about the Shakti, how do you get your Shakti? Because everybody wants Shakti. And then, and everybody you start thinking is a Shakti. Sri Aurobindo says, be careful, 1 in 100. But he says there are conditions. So the disciple says, sir, please tell the conditions also. So Sri Aurobindo says, he is trying to avoid. One can see, that's a very interesting conversation. He says, it is very dangerous. I don't want to tell. Sir, even there is something in the sexual union which can be connected to that. Yes, but I don't want to tell you all. They, will misunderstand it. But eventually he gives one secret. And that secret is complete freedom from sexual impulse. If you have desire, Kama, forget about the union of Parvati and Shiva. So first Shiva destroys Kama. It's not an act of anger. He got angry, they saw third eye opening and terrible Shiva. No, he is moved by love. But he says, this love, you want me and Parvati to unite in this love? This will meet the same end which happens between me and Sati. I want this love to be restored to its original eternity. And that is the story of Shiva and Parvati. We'll read about that marriage today in another poem. So as I said, first poem is Epiphany. There is another Shiva, the inconscient creator. And there is a third poem on, again, named Shiva. And it's on page 609. And we'll read that poem. Shiva. First, Sri Aurobindo describes Shiva with his greatness and grandeur. He has in the previous poem, he describes Shiva as a crimson red point, before creation. People speak about the Big Bang. Before that, nothingness. Now that nothingness is concentrated energy on one point. And when Mother had so many experiences with Shiva. So one of them, she describes, he has a reddish, all crimson red color. It's a red because red is very earthly color and it's fire. Tapasya, he's the lord of tapasya. So because of that tapasya, he is full of that energy of the fire. So what is tapasya? Tapasya has nothing to do with sitting in a kamandalo, wearing a dhoti and having a beard. All that is nothing to do with tapasya. Tapasya is literally energy of concentrated spiritual endeavor. That's all tapasya is about. So what happens when we concentrate any energy? It grows like any fire. So it grows, and a time comes when it grows and has the power, whatever power you are concentrating upon, whatever aspect tapasya is being conducted, it becomes very powerful. So if you have tapasya of speech, which means I'll always speak the truth, then if once in a while you curse somebody, it will come true. Why? Because you are moved by truth, you have practiced. It can't be like anybody cursing anyone. People often use this, but some rishi has done that. If you have practiced tapasya of love, your heart will develop that power of love, which will have the capacity to move, this entire creation upward. Because it's that, love is the healing force. You have done that tapasya. Similarly, all kinds of tapasya, it is concentrated energy, but energy of spiritual endeavor. When you have done it with the idea of connecting it to the divine, then it gathers within it the force and power. So that's what tapasya is about. And Shiva is the tapasvi. He likes datura. Small little incidents when somebody offered one datura flower to mother in playground. She said, "Oh, Shiva had come some time back, I would have given it to him." And we know that, she asked, the gods would often come. She has said, "I know all the gods, not only in this tradition, other traditions. Since childhood, they would come to her." Naturally, they knew Leela. So, when 1926, just before that, the plane of the gods was coming to earth, she asked them, "Will you take a human body?" All of them refused. Shiva said, "I will come when there is a supramental creation, but I can help you in the process." So, how can you help? I can destroy ego. That's how he liberates moksha. So, she says, okay. Other planes, the ego has gone, but the physical ego is still there. Annamaya Kosh. She says, okay. So, Shiva starts his Tandava, and the mother experiences all her cells dilating and as if they are dispersing. So she goes to Sri Aurobindo and says, because she has told him without asking Sri Aurobindo outwardly. Now that's before she has taken the ashram charge. After that, Sri Aurobindo said, "I am the Shakti of Sri Aurobindo," with a purpose. So there she was a Mahayogini in her own right. So she goes and tells Sri Aurobindo, "I have a funny feeling. All my cells are as if getting dilated and dispersing." Sri Aurobindo knew instantly what is happening. He said, "No, not yet." And everything stopped. He could stop the Tandav dance of Shiva. Literally, it means that. The effect of that dance. And then, much later in 61, she has the same experience and she says, "Shiva had given me that, but 61, the physical ego, she is now ready to dissolve." So these are mysteries which, our human mind thinks they are all fantasies. But to the gods, the life we lead is a fantasy. Because why it is a fantasy? We plan, no? Life will be like this, life will be like that. And what do the gods say? I know, fantasize. There is a very nice aphorism of Sri Ramakrishna. He says, God laughs on two occasions. One, when a doctor goes and looks at a patient and says, "I am going to cure you," whereas God has already decided to take him away. And the second is during a marriage when they say, "We will be forever," and God has decided this is not going to last. So we think that is fantasy. If you look at it from God's point of view, this is fantasy. We are all our plans, rational plans are fantasies. If you look clearly, it is fantasy. Where does it really follow the logic we have decided? The couples take oath together forever, promised. How long does the promise last? This is the proof that we live in fantasy. Illusions. Now, I'm not going into why these illusions. But Shiva breaks all illusions. That's his task. But here, in this yoga, you don't break illusions, you transform illusions into what they represent. So, what is meant by breaking the illusion? Illusion is a distortion of a reality. That's how Mother explains the difference between Shankara and Buddha's view and Sri Aurobindo's views. So Shankara and Buddha discarded the entire thing. It's an illusion. It doesn't need much reading of scriptures to understand. I mean, if God has created this world, well, when you look at the world in its appearances, it's very far from Sat or Chit or Ananda or anything else. The only thing you can at times feel is Ananda, but that too a little joy. Very far from that. So it is an illusion. So Shankara and Buddha said it's an illusion, it's a suffering, come out of it. Sri Aurobindo said it's an illusion, but not in the sense of a non-existent something. It's an illusion in the sense that it's a distortion of a reality. Like the snake and rope. The same story that Shankara uses to describe that it's an illusion. He says it means there is something. We look at it either as a snake or a rope depending on our standpoint. But there is something out there. Now, this world is an illusion in the sense it's a distortion and it must be transformed. So, in Shiva's story, we have seen Sati, the Avidyamai, transformed into Parvati. And Shiva is the Lord of that transformation because unless our lower nature changes into equivalent of higher supernature, things will remain what they are. So, that's why they are the original replicas of marriage, never again created on earth. Because Parvati Mata went away to the spiritual Mount Kailash, though here she was born in the earthly being, material nature. So Shiva, on the white summit of eternity, a single soul of bare infinities. Bare. Infinities, each possibility is there, but it is not manifested. So it's bare. Love, yes, it's there. Has it manifested? No, it's bare. Light, it's there. Has it manifested? No. It's before light is born. Life, possible. Has it manifested? No. So bare infinities. Guarded, he keeps by a fire screen of peace. You can't know what is lying as possibilities within the infinite. Why? Because there is a screen of peace. When you go near Shiva, you get drunk. That is not that what people drink here. It's the wine of ecstasy. Soma, the last godhead, he carries on his head. The moon. It waxes and wanes. Moon, of course, is also spiritual knowledge, but also it is Soma. So this peace and ecstasy, the peace is so tremendous. It's very difficult after that. The peace can drown so much. The experience can be so overwhelming of that, of which nothing can be said. That why would one come back and out into the fields of nature and strive? It's almost like you don't feel the will to do it. Everything is absorbed into it. It's a very powerful, overpowering experience. Unless the Divine Mother wills that you come out, you cannot come out of that state. It's not an ordinary peace that I feel very peaceful in meditation. It's a peace that drowns everything around you. Not only you, but scooters, human beings, creatures, everybody is in that. Even your movement, your communication, it's described in Savitri. It's one of the fundamental experiences of yoga. Everything is so far. What work? If you say that time, what are you trying to do? You don't know what it means to do. It just carries on mechanically. Why? Because the body is driven by whatever. But there also, it doesn't matter to you whether you do or not do. That is the state of that peace. So it is screened. So you don't know. You think it is nothing beyond that. But all he has held within. His mystic loneliness of nude ecstasy. That's what. So it is that peace and ecstasy of being alone. That is there inside the heart of Shiva. But touched by an immense delight to be. See, this is the story of creation. Na Sadhya Sutra, where suddenly the Divine Mother seizes upon him and there is a delight to create. So touched by the delight. So presence of the Lord in his static aspect brings peace. And the presence of the Divine Mother brings Ananda. Because she is the creatrix force. The moment there is Ananda, creation begins. And wherever the Lord's presence brings peace. So if you experience peace, that means Sri Aurobindo has touched you. When you experience the joy of creation, new things, then the Divine Mother. They are one, but two aspects of one reality. But touched by an immense delight to be, he looks across unending depths and sees, musing amid the inconscient silences, the mighty mother's dumb felicity. Why? Because she has become this inconscient, Brahmajaya. She has entered into the dark inconscient foundation of things. That's where she is sleeping. He suddenly wakes up and says, where is my consort? So he sees into endless space, or rather boundless space, endless time. Where is she? Where is she? In the inconscient she is hidden. That is the story of the Brahmajaya, also in the Rig Veda, where the Shakti of the Lord enters into the utter darkness. She is gone there. She has become the dark mother, Diti. So there he sees, looks for her and finds that she is in the dark inconscient. Of course, that second part is not here in that original story. Then he says, summons the gods. But in Shiv Puran you will find that also. You will find the gods are his own children, Kartikeya and Ganesha. They will go and start, waking up the Divine Mother. And she doesn't know. She is like an ordinary girl. So they come and tell her, oh, you want to... She has this thing about Shiva. And they will come and start saying, they become like ordinary human beings. A very sweet story. But the gods must go. Kartikeya is fire. So the gods must go and awaken and bring her back. So the gods, when they want to go, this is not there in the poem, but it's worth reading. So God say, we can go. But how will we go alone? So Shiva out of his heart brings out love, the Divine Mother aspect of love. It is still inside his heart. They take a portion of that love and go inside. And that love crystallizes the psychic being, if you go into that story. And then, with the psychic being as the leader, priest of the sacrifice, the gods guarding him, it's now a seed. So the gods have to guard him, it's their work. But seeing the psychic being, psychic essence, the Divine Mother wakes up and she starts coming. Sri Ramakrishna explains this in a very beautiful way, like a parable. He says, you try to drag a cow, see whether she will come, she can't come. But you just take a calf near the cow and you drag the calf and the cow will follow. The story can be understood in two ways. One is wherever the bhakta is, the Divine Mother is there. The other way is that if you awaken the psychic being within you, the Divine Mother will be there with you because it's the child of the Divine Mother. So that is how the story of creation, from evolution from dark inconscient to matter, matter to life, to various life forms, to mind, and eventually it will go to the next level. Why? Because who is calling her? The evolutionary energy. She has to meet the Creator. But the difference is that as she goes, she is the Divine Mother. She will carry everything around. In the typical story of Shiva, it is Shiva who goes to Divine Mother, Parvati, to get married. And he carries everybody. He says, I can't help it. All creatures belong to me. Bhoot, Pishach, Devata, they are all fighting, but they all want to see the marriage. So he says, come along. Sir, but no, your choice. So everybody comes along and the Divine Mother welcomes them. You see that line in Savitri? That even the dark deities who leapt from the breast of the one in revolt, they too are safe. A mother's arms desires her rebel sons. So Mother Parvati, they go and she welcomes all of them. That is how she can create that harmony between the rat and the snake and all kinds of creatures who are mutually who would fight with each other because she is that. So this is the story of the Divine Mother. She sees Mighty Mother's dumb felicity in matter. So how does he know that she is hiding there? He sees that there is some glint of joy somewhere. You see, even in utter darkness, often people say, what is there in darkness? Light is not there. Some people are afraid. But if you just try to muse in that state, you will still feel a glint of joy. This is a real material level experience I've had in Siachen at the base camp. So the sun sets very early and the moon doesn't come up because you are between the mountains. So the sun will set around 4 o'clock. The moon may not come by 10 o'clock. So now, if you take a walk, because it's all barren and nude, several times wearing all kinds of jacket and everything, I have gone near the Shyok River because it's such a beautiful, I can't forget that. No landscapes. I mean, there are mountains in the background, but because it's the thick of night, so you walk by the side of that thin little stream. It's so exhilarating. Simply because of that loneliness, you recover all the joy of the world. So you feel that joy. There is no light, but there is joy. There is no life, but there is joy. Because it's just there. And you can enter into the ecstatic trance. It's an amazing experience, which you can have in mountains in this way. Of course, yogis don't need to go to mountains. They go into the inner mountains. But even in world, there are landscapes which are like that. So he sees, musing amid the inconscient silences. Even in the silence, who is hidden? When darkness was dense and wrapped within darkness, he was seated within it, immense and alone, the mighty mother's dumb felicity. So what happens when Shiva looks at her? Look at the beauty of this. Half now awake, she rises to his glance. Who looked at me? There is a poem of Sri Aurobindo worth reading. It's a Bangla poem translated in English. Very powerful poem. The mother awakes. But that's in a Kali robe because she's in the inconscient. So she wakes up as Kali. Suddenly there is restlessness, tumult. She wakes up as Kali. And it's a very powerful poem. Its name is The Mother Awakes. And then in that poem, he describes Purusha and Prakriti as two beings, a young boy and young girl, forever in love. That young girl, because she is nature. Nature never grows old. We grow old, but nature never grows old. She knows how to renew herself. And the young boy, the psychic being, is ageless. So the two are engaged in each other, with each other, and kissing each other. It's a you observe that that poem, and it's amazing. So that's only in the PDF file of Bangla writings we translated in English. In CWSA Bangla writings you won't find it. I mean, it's there in Bengali. So half now awake, she rises to his glance. So why evolution is happening? Because the divine has looked upon the inconscient. Just imagine. About psychic being also, Sri Aurobindo says, determining predestined act, name and form by the glance, just because it looks, it wakes up. Then move to circling by her heartbeat's will. Which way she will go? Her heart tells her which way to go. Love tells her. The rhythmic worlds describe that passion dance. She is going to the Lord. It's a joyous journey. So people who want to go to the divine with grim seriousness, the Lord will say, please, you are coming to Anandamay. Why are you so serious and grim? Many stories to tell, but I'll not. But you see, several places you will read mother's conversations. People have painted an image of both Sri Aurobindo and the mother. This is the work of the Asura, that they were very serious. So with Sri Aurobindo had to correct that notion. He says, oh, you mean to say what kind of, what rubbish, that is how he starts. Notions do you have of an unsmiling Sri Aurobindo? That was how Nevinshan described me. But Sri Aurobindo's smile is amazing. Look at his half a smile is enough to give your life for that. There is the smile of the Lord. And mother, you see in several places, you will read suddenly, mother says, in bracket it will be written, mother laughs. Thank God somebody has noted that. Mother laughs. You can hear it obviously in the conversation. Gurgling laughter. Laughter of the gods. Mother laughs. She will say, so? And then mother laughs. One of the places she goes to the supramental world, and then she sees what they value, the supramental world. And she says, I woke up with an uncontrollable laughter. Why, mother? Why were you laughing? Because I realized none of your values have any meaning there. She is like, mother, all this idea about ascetic purity and sanctity of marriage has no meaning there. You are not allowed entry with all this. Why? Because all these are rules which are made by Prajapati, not by their divine acts in freedom and infinity. So she says, okay, but tell us what is required. She says, wideness and plasticity and equanimity. Not less, not easier, more difficult. But nevertheless, so there it is. Then move to circling by her heartbeat's will. Her heartbeat creates the rhythms of the world. That's how others' experience of 1962. The beatings of the heart become the rhythms of the worlds. The rhythmic worlds describe that passion dance. This passion dance is the dance of creation known as Lasya. It brings Ananda. And you can actually see, if you look at sometimes a whole year passing by, there's nice little images, but see it in fast forward. And it's amazing. It really looks like a dance. Just imagine to the mind. Earth is moving. We all know, moving around the sun. We know it. But science will tell us like a cold, abstract thing. Earth is moving around the sun. But what is happening along with that? Moon is moving. What is the moon doing? It is drawing the waters towards itself. Now imagine what is the moon doing? Moon is literally drawing the waters and the earth moves and again the water falls. Just picturize it. It is something so beautiful. Moon is also playing a role. It is carrying the light of the sun and it starts drawing the water. Let's imagine, water is going towards moon, but earth is following the sun. And then it falls. And again it draws and again it falls. If you look at it from time-lapse photography, it will be amazing to watch that. It's literally as if it is being renewed each moment by the energy of the moon. That is the role it has. It renews itself. Life springs in her and mind is born. So out of the inconscient, dumb felicity is matter. Then suddenly, because the Lord, she recognizes the Lord, so life springs in her. And then because she has to go to the Lord, so who has to become the mediator? Mind. Mind must become the mediator between life and the supramental world towards which she must go. Life springs in her and mind is born. Her face she lifts to him, who is herself. She recognizes they are not two, they appear as two in creation, separated by time and space. When you experience the separation in time and space, you are two. When you are united, regardless of time and space, then there is the eternal union. So there is she wakes up and says, oh, it is myself, my own truth. She lifts to him who is herself until the spirit leaps into the spirit's embrace. So she lifts towards him and sees. So this is the last point of nature, where nature in her upheavings looks at the divine and says, so hamasmi. I am that. And then the divine says, oh, you recognized me? Till you are in a religious sense, oh, God is out there and I am here, poor fellow. So God says, you want to play by this rule? Okay, fine, I'll play by this rule. But the day you wake up and a time comes when within nature something rises and leaps and says, thou art myself concealed. When Mother was asked, who is the divine? Several definitions he has given. One of them is this. The divine is, who am I? That was the question. Now you see several kinds of, on these books are written, all this. Mother gave a one-line answer. Who am I? Mother says the divine in many disguises. So what does he do when every time we have problems? He is stripping off one disguise. And we say, no, please let it remain. No. I'll show you who you are. But this is such a nice disguise, no? I'm a good guy. Oh, you want to remain good guy? Okay. Wait for another century. Then he strips you bare step by step. So she reaches and then she recognizes that who is she? There is a union between nature and soul, between the divine and Shakti. They are not two, they are one. So when she reaches that point where she recognizes that who is the Lord? Herself. That's where she recognizes that the division is a false thing. It's a artificial creation. It's the biggest falsehood to dig an abyss between matter and spirit, between the world and God. But how to bridge it? When you reach that point. You can't bridge it before that. It's not by thought that you can bridge it. So you reach that point, she recognizes. And when she recognizes, then what happens? The Lord says, so you got it? Yes, Lord. What a game. Do you still feel the suffering? Are? Now you are there. What suffering? It's nothing. And they rush into each other's embrace. So we'll read this wonderful poem. I want to just go on and on. But, we'll sum it up. I'm reminded of that story of Nizamuddin when his disciple Amir Khusro comes. From his retinue, he gives away everything because somebody who is coming from Nizamuddin's side is carrying a pair of sandals of Nizamuddin. And he recognizes, he says, these sandals will you give me? Yes. What price? He says, if I give you all of this, is it okay? He says, yes. Now in his retinue, he is a minister. You have Hathi, Goda, Palki, everything is there. And then with his sandals, he puts it on his forehead and goes to his master. So master smiles and puts it in his feet. Master says, how expensive was it? And Amir Khusro, the disciple, says, very cheap, Lord, very cheap. I had to only part with material things. This is love. Love is not what we think of. This is love. And the highest love between the child and the Divine Mother, between the disciple and the master, where you are ready to abandon everything. And in its peak, between the divine nature and the Supreme Lord. So first we must upgrade. A process of upgradation is going on. So, backup things are going on. So sometimes our nature may appear faulty, but it's because upgrading is going on. But a time comes when the nature recognizes herself as the Lord, one with the Lord. And then it's the Lord's play. When will the divine life come? When the strongest boy in the crowd, no, the strongest girl and the sweetest boy, something like that, like Krishna and Kali, shedding all shame and sin where all we have come. They laugh together. So that's when the new world. Why? Because you'll recognize in all this the play of the Lord and his spouse. So I'll just read it and we'll stop. Shiva on the white summit of eternity, a single soul of bare infinities, guarded he keeps by a fire screen of peace. Fire screen, the peace, it's not a inconscient peace. It's the tremendous peace, powerful peace. It's a power, fire screen of peace, peace that comes by tapasya, his mystic loneliness of nude ecstasy. The mountains guard the sweetest streams inside their heart, but touched by an immense delight to be. He looks across. What is this immense delight to be? Again, the same Divine Mother. She has become inconscient, but here she is saying, wake up. I am there also. So it's that seizes upon that nothingness and he begins to. He looks across unending depths and sees, musing amid the inconscient silences, the mighty mother's dumb felicity. Half now awake, she rises to his glance, then moved to circling by her heartbeat's will. The rhythmic worlds describe that passion dance. Life springs in her, and mind is born. Her face she lifts to him who is herself, until the spirit leaps into the spirit's embrace. So this is the last bit of the symbol. Parvati and Shiva's union is described as Shivlingam, where you have the lingam and the yoni is the union of divine soul and material nature. But in the legend of Sati, wherever the part of the mother has felt, Sati, you know that it is in a place which is rocky. Have you ever thought why? Even in the plains like Gaya, it will be on a rocky spot. Because rocks are symbol of material nature. Even there it is the same effort. So the story of creation is the story of union of nature, Prakriti, and the soul, Purusha. And where that happens, there is beauty, there is love, there is delight. Namaste.